Welcome to Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix. Ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, interdimensional philosophers, seekers of truth, and last but certainly not least, all of you that desperately cling to your confirmation bias, we're thrilled that you've decided to muse with us. Whether your interest is Atlantis, Zeus, or anything in between, we tackle it all from our quantumly entangled castle tucked away in the ancient flood-battered Central Pangean mountain range. We are a podcast dedicated to exploring the fringe with logic, unraveling the interdimensional and mythical matrix, and where we also theorize the fourth dimension exists and is the spiritual. Only trigger warning for this episode is a logical conversation, so if applying the Socratic method on fringe topics is disturbing to you, you might want to turn off the podcast now. That being said, I'm once again joined by my wifey, Miss Madison.
What's up?
So you have a psychology fact for us?
Yes. So it kind of ties in with our topic today, but water bodies have a stimulating effect on our minds. So they help calm our brains, and it has something to do with the color blue.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
so like color psychology.
Yeah, almost.
Nice.
And also, who would have thought staying well hydrated has many benefits?
Many that I'm sure you're not aware of.
Yeah. For those who don't know, I am currently drinking my first glass of water for the day, and it is now nighttime, so...
8:30 p.m. Yeah.
But apparently, staying hydrated improves concentration and focus, increases mood, or improves mood, and reduces stress and headaches. But who would have thought that?
Who would have thought that?
Yeah.
Whenever you're like, my head hurts, my first question is always, have you had a glass of water today? And your answer is usually no. So,
Very true.
yeah. So, apologies to all of our 5 dedicated listeners that this episode will be releasing a little bit late. Should be releasing Friday morning, late Thursday evening, depending on what time zone you're in. It's been a bit of a long, chaotic week. You got caught up with a whole bunch of extra school assignments.
Yeah.
I got called up for jury duty, which I did end up getting out of. Yeah, so there's kind of the brief rundown and explanation. Just been a crazy week, but it'll happen sometime. So I figure as long as we can get an episode out the same week, it shouldn't be the end of the world. And maybe make your Friday go a little bit faster for those of you with more conventional 9 to 5-ish jobs. So this episode, we are going to be talking about the Red Sea first. I have another topic I'd like to get to, but we'll see how we're doing on time after this discussion.
Nice pun.
I did a pun. Oh,
We'll see.
We'll see. Nice. Yeah. That happens a lot with my drone business. I'm like, yeah, when my drone business takes off, and it's like, yeah, I don't even mean to do that pun. It just flows naturally at this point. Flows naturally like water. Okay. Anyway, I need to reel it in. I can't stop. Okay. So it came to my attention that there's some debate about the Red Sea in the Bible, where the crossing of the Red Sea supposedly occurred with like Moses and all of that. I'm sure a lot of our listeners and those that are tuning into our show are familiar with the story. If not, I'll kind of give you the down and dirty, Reader's Digest version right here. Basically, the Israelites are enslaved in Egypt after being there for, I think, about 400 years. And Moses somehow escapes calamity. Well, not somehow. God kind of intervenes, and he gets sent down in a basket. So that's that classic story you probably heard in Sunday school as a baby. And then he gets adopted into the Pharaoh's household. He finds out that he's actually a Hebrew, not an Egyptian. So he breaks off and kind of goes out on his own for a bit. And then he encounters God, and God tells him to go back and to get the Israelites out of Egypt, which is something that he was burdened with all along. And you can kind of tell that in the, early mid accounts when he's back in Pharaoh's court. So then he comes back and he demands for Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. And Pharaoh says no. And so God causes a series of 10 different plagues to afflict Egypt. which that in of itself is a cool study because each of the 10 plagues is supposedly like, how do I put this respectfully? It's God's way of saying screw you to each of the Egyptian deities because they involve frogs and locusts and water. And so it's like everything that the Egyptians deified, God kind of stuck it like a screw you, I'm more powerful than your gods kind of a thing, which is an interesting study. Whether you're a Christian or not, I think it's an interesting perspective. You have something you want to add?
No, it just reminded me of that the video where you think that's a knife, this is a knife, and it's like basically what happened there.
Yeah, so and that's an interesting account in of itself that we might want to get to later at some point, but that's not the focus for tonight. So after the 10th plague, Pharaoh finally says, okay, fine, you've beaten me. Take your people and get out of Egypt. So Moses takes the people and God leads them out of Egypt, and then God kind of leads them around a little bit, and they get cornered in by a body of water, and the Egyptians decide, you know what were we doing? They're wandering around the wilderness. They don't know what's going on. We can go get our slaves back. So they run out after them, surround them, and then God directs Moses to part the sea. And I'm not saying Red Sea here purposefully because I want this to kind of be an open-minded detective approach to this episode, if you will. So Moses parts the sea with God's power and ability. The Israelites cross and the Egyptians follow. And just as the last Israelite steps out from the crossing, God returns the waters to normal, and these two walls of water on either side just collapse and destroy Pharaoh's army. And then from there, God leads the Israelites out of Egypt officially. So for those of you that haven't been to Sunday school or heard that before, there's your Reader's Digest, 5-minute rundown.
The Cliff Notes.
Yeah, a short version. So the main debate here is about, it was thought for a very long time that the Red Sea was the one that was being referenced here. Now, it probably wouldn't have been specifically the Red Sea in more traditional Christian thought. It would have been, the Gulf of Suez or the Gulf of Aqaba. I'm assuming I'm saying that right. But that's those two bunny ears on the Red Sea for the Sinai Peninsula, for those of you not looking at a map. So that's probably what would be thought in most traditional Christian circles. If you were to go to your average pastor and ask them where the crossing occurred, it'd be one of those two. Not the actual huge body of the Red Sea that would take like 2 years to cross if you were walking, maybe not 2 years, but like a very long time. So it's a huge stretch of water. So that's kind of more what we're referencing here when we're saying the Red Sea. It would be one of those gulfs, not the actual very literal, main section of the Red Sea. But so there's theorizations that that translation is wrong. And it's theorized by some people, some scholars, and just, kind of random TikTok users, influencers, that kind of thing, that what's being referenced is actually the Sea of Reeds, which is that gets hard in of itself because the Bible uses all of these terms to define locations, and we're not sure what these locations are. And so it gets very hard to pinpoint an exact spot when we haven't figured out and correlated these historic locations as they're referenced with historical geographical locations. Because it's not like these come with GPS coordinates when you're reading the Bible. So you've got to kind of play detective a little bit, and that gets challenging. But the Sea of Reeds is thought to be generally a more shallow body of water that has a lot of reeds growing in it. And it could be like certain large lakes that are, kind of north of the Gulf of Suez. There's a couple large lakes if you look on Google Maps. And that's thought that could be the Sea of Reeds. But, ultimately, we don't even know what the Sea of Reeds is. And the other problem is we're talking about geography. I think this was probably like 4,000, 5,000 years ago. We're talking about something that happened. The geography of Egypt has changed. It's important to note that there are certain temples that are on the northern part of the delta of the Nile that were built on the shoreline and have since been completely submerged in water. I forget the names of them, but there are a couple of temples that are 100% underwater. And you want a great exploration of this, go check out the Assassin's Creed Origins. You can go, if you play the game right, you can go diving and explore some of those ruins in the game itself. But just to kind of illustrate that point that, hey, there's been major shifts in water flow. Now, whether that was because of deposits of sediment over the Nile over very long periods of time, or whether it was because of ice water, melting or refreezing, or however you want to quantify that, we can't be sure, of course. But, there's a lot of different speculation. And then I don't trust a lot of dating methodologies for a lot of things. So, which we've already discussed in the show in our science episodes. So it's important to note as well. So any questions or concerns or thoughts so far, dear?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay. Don't be afraid to jump in.
Well, you did say, I forget the exact number you said, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago.
I think 4,000, something in there.
And that, just to clarify, that's based off of biblical timeline.
Well, biblical or not, that's kind of the general historical thought process.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're evolutionist and you believe the Earth is millions of years old, this account is probably coming from around 3,000 to 5,000 BC.
Right. I just wanted to
that's fair.
Make that clarification.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not an awful long time ago then if it's that.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a long time ago for us, but it depends how you quantify a long time ago.
Yeah, comparing the two.
So, well, let's dive into a little bit of like the Hebrew here. The specific phrase that's used to reference in the Sea of Reeds is Yam Suf, which means Sea of Reeds in Hebrew. And that is referenced several times in the Exodus account. But there's a big problem with this here. The Yam Suf is not once mentioned in the actual account of the sea, catching myself, the sea being parted for the crossing. That is not the word that's used. It's Hayam that's used, which refers to generally a larger body of water than Yam Suf would. So it's the same root word, Yam, Y-A-M sound. And it's the same word same type of root word that's used in the creation account in Genesis 1 from our earlier analysis that refers to large bodies of water like massive oceans. So when it says God created, pulled up the land and gathered waters into one place and called them seas, that's the same word and type of meaning that's understood here, once you sift through the grammar. So it exclusively means large body of water. So that's an important thing to note here because Hayam and derivations of that, it can't be something small. It can't be something like this Sea of Reeds. So like if you want a point of reference, I'm trying to think geographically here, like Sea of Galilee in Israel or larger, like something pretty big. Doesn't have to be like an ocean or, just something really big. It doesn't have to be like, something completely like massive that would take up like a third of like Egypt or something like that. But it's just, it's a bigger body of water, not something micro. The problem with this then comes when there's a counter argument to this. And so I want to apply a scientific, approach to it here a little bit. The word Yam Suf is supposedly, this is what some people claim, supposedly derives from, what is it? The Dead Sea Scrolls, I think, is where it derives from in its usage before and after the Exodus, end of Exodus 13, beginning of Exodus 14 account. It is Yam Suf. That's where it comes from. Now, supposedly, there is no Dead Sea Scrolls of Exodus, end of Exodus 13, beginning of Exodus 14, for us to see what word they used in the Dead Sea Scrolls, because that fragment is missing. So supposedly, this is the other argument here, that word that is translated for sea comes from the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation, and so it's kind of playing the translation, telephone game, if you will. And so that's some of the argument there. So I put on my nerd hat a couple weeks back, and I decided, let me see what I can find about this. And I found a digital library of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I popped open all of the Hebrew ones, and I started trying to read through the original Hebrew, which I am not a Hebrew scholar. I have a very rudimentary understanding of Hebrew, enough to talk about it intelligently on the podcast, but not enough to be like, oh, I can, go dissect all of these ancient texts with extreme accuracy. And I ran into a problem because I realized that it was written in a different type of Hebrew. It was Paleo Hebrew, not the original Hebrew we're used to seeing. So it had completely different characters. And so I'm having to try to look up what these characters are contrasted to the original Hebrew and be like, okay, I'm looking for this word, or this word. Do I see this anywhere? And it's not like they had, chapter headings or anything like that. And it's not like all of the fragments on this website were translated either. So I'm having to go through, look for like one of 3 certain words and skim lines of Paleo Hebrew written, faded out on these like disintegrated sheets. Yeah, I'm a nerd. It's fine.
You said about putting on your nerd hat. That's assuming that you always take it off, too.
Yeah, that is true.
I feel like you always have it on.
Yes, I always have it on. Once a nerd, always a nerd, right? But all that being said, I could not find a section of Exodus, end of Exodus 13, beginning of Exodus 14, from those digital records, assuming they're complete, of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there could be some substance to that argument, and I would like... People claim this, like I was reading articles and stuff, and people are claiming that this word from sea comes from the Septuagint and it's not from the Dead Sea Scrolls in Exodus 14. But I'd like to see like actual evidence and substance for this and not just like, oh yeah, this is what it says. So that's kind of my approach on it. And, one thing I've kind of noticed as well is there seems like there's a trend going around to take things that happen in the Bible and try to like discredit them and downplay them as being like, oh, this was a miracle, but it didn't really happen this way. It happened that way. It was, it wasn't really God that caused the Red Sea to split. It was like a meteor impacting that caused the waters to stop flowing for a little bit and then just conveniently seemed to wipe out the Egypt. It's like
a lot of things have to line up for it to specifically happen the way that it says it happened in the Bible.
Yeah, and I mean, there could certainly be aspects of the Bible that we've maybe misunderstood. But I don't think that...
Well, there's definitely human error, like throughout the years of translating the original.
Oh, of course.
So,
and I think that there, maybe there's certain events that are referred to that like we misunderstand as something too because of translation and maybe a little bit of linguistic difference. But I think that it's very logically inconsistent to be like, oh, everything that like the Bible says, or even some of the great things the Bible says, oh, I don't think that those actually like happened. Because you need evidence, to kind of take that stance. The Bible in of itself has shown to be a reliable historical document with incredible detail on very small things. And you can see that episodes 19 and 20 were historical validity episodes where we did a real deep dive into like very small details that the Bible gets right about like locations of like where a judgment seat would be in ruins. And you're able to find that. Like, when I was in Israel, we found that, like we could see it, and the text very clearly annotates it. And so to be like, oh, well, it gets the small details right, but the big stuff, I think that might be some exaggeration. It's like, well, I don't know. I feel like that's a little bit logically inconsistent to be like, well, the Bible gets all these small details right, but just because this thing's big, I'm going to say it didn't really happen, or at least fully happen the way the Bible describes. And
I will say that there's like a phenomenon that happens, like eyewitness account. Where, say somebody robs a bank. That's why you keep the witnesses separate, because what one person sees is not what the other person sees. And, if you keep them together, they affect the other person's perspective. That's psychology too. But, it's the same principle there with the Bible that, it's eyewitness account. And
yeah.
So there's going to be some difference, I guess, between what one person saw and what another person saw, but
right, and it's hard to know how these accounts were derived specifically because there's a lot of theories as to like who wrote them. Yeah, but it gets kind of hard to delineate clearly. But yeah, no, people are welcome to believe whatever they want to believe, as we've talked about on this show countless times. I'm not going to force you to say, oh, the Bible got these small details right, therefore, you have to believe it's correct on these big details. No. That's not the premise of our show. If you're listening for the first time, we'll set that precedent now. But I do think it is a little bit logically inconsistent to be like, oh, well, we know it got all these small details right, but these bigger things, I don't know if I can believe that, so I'm just going to kind of push them aside. I think you should approach it with an open mind. It's
like you said, like just, like a minute or two ago, where like you have to have evidence to not believe in something just as much as you need to have evidence to believe in something.
Right. Yeah. And so like the thing is like, and that could be towing the line of a logical fallacy there a little bit. So let me kind of reiterate what I'm trying to say. That, just because the Bible claims something doesn't make it true or false. We have
Right.
to evaluate the evidence, of course. But the Bible has demonstrated that it is a reliable historical document in numerous areas. And when you really break down all the supposed contradictions, there doesn't seem to be any contradictions that actually stand. It's often just misunderstandings because of complex nuances. Like there's different dating methods that are used, different calendars that are used by different tribes. And one of those gets referenced in like 1st and 2nd Kings, and another one gets referenced in 1st and 2nd Chronicles. So there's overlap in what they talk about, but they use quote unquote different years. In actuality, it's just a misunderstanding of the type of calendars that they're using. And when you factor that in, everything lines right back up.
I'm so glad you brought up calendars because there's this whole thing where, Jesus wasn't actually born on Christmas Day. And it's like, yeah, that's right. Because they didn't use like the traditional,
Yeah.
like they didn't use the calendar that we use today. So
Right. And yeah,
at least I don't think so.
That's actually a good question. I don't know about that because the calendar we use today would have been around with the Romans. Like that's why we have July and August, because those months were renamed after Julius Caesar and Augustus. So the calendar was the 365 day, I think, was around the time of Augustus, and that would have been shortly before Jesus's birth. So in theory, we were. Now, I do think that they got the date wrong because I think there's like been some scholarly breakdown, and that was just kind of a guess that it was Christmas Day. And there's a whole like other debate there about like trying to overshadow pagan holidays and everything, and I'm not going to get into that one on this one. But I think you pulled something up, so go ahead.
I did. So like obviously there's like December, but then there's also a lot of people that say September because I guess some people calculated that Jesus was born in that month based on the assumption that Mary had conceived like right after Gabriel's visit.
Right.
So, and then there's spring, November, there's all sorts of other theories, but I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, so I mean there's no way to know for sure. And like that's the thing, is that there's real no major scholarly arguments that I've seen, and any listener listening here that has something that disagrees is welcome to chime in and send us an email at m.quad.musings@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to address that.
Yeah, but please do.
Yeah, please send me some hate mail. Just don't use logical fallacies. I'll leave you anonymous, but I will ridicule you on the podcast.
Well, and not even hate mail, but like if you genuinely believe something different and like you think that there's like good evidence pointing towards something else, I would love to hear that.
Me too. And as you know, with me, I am all about objectivity and logic. So I will listen to the other side of the argument wholeheartedly. I've had my mind changed on certain things that I've believed for years because I might not always present it, but I'm a very open-minded person to hearing the other side. And even as I'm talking with the other person, I'm evaluating what they're saying to say, does this check out? Could I be wrong on this? And that's just my approach to life. And I think that's how everyone should approach life, but not everyone does.
Yeah. We got wildly off topic,
we
so
did.
I apologize.
No, that's normal for the show. That being said, we are very overdue for a short ad break, so please give this a listen. You skip over it, we don't get as much credit for the ad listens, so I know it might be frustrating, but it definitely helps the show if you're willing to give the ads a short listen. So if you wouldn't mind just staying with us for the next 45 seconds, 50 seconds or so, and we'll be right back. Back. Ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, our good friend Harry that is listening and messaged me about not releasing the podcast episode on Wednesday. Shout out to you, Harry, for being such a dedicated fan. We appreciate all of your love and support.
Hi, Harry.
So he was not happy about my King James Version comment on the last episode. He did tell me that.
That doesn't surprise me.
No, me either.
Sorry.
Just waiting for our guest Harrison to re-listen or catch up on episodes. I know he does tune in from time to time, and then I'm sure I'll get an earful on the next, a respectful earful, and then he'll put me in a chokehold and choke me out if he doesn't like my stance afterwards. So
was he the one that like accidentally slapped you or something?
Yes.
Yeah. So he'll just like accidentally, quote unquote, slap you again.
Yeah, accidentally choke me out and make me drool into a martial arts mat. It's a good thing he's far away, several different time zones away from me now.
Yes.
I'm safe. at least for now. I don't think he has my. I hope he doesn't have my address. Anyway,
he might. He'll figure it out if he wants.
He could figure it out.
Anyways.
All right, getting back on topic here. So there's, for example, we kind of referenced some smaller lakes above I think it was what was it? The Suez Canal? No, I don't want to say the Suez Canal. It's the Gulf of Suez.
Yeah.
One of those is like the Great Bitter Lake, and you can see this on Google Maps if you pop it open now. It's just north of the Red Sea. That could be the body of water size is close to like the Sea of Galilee. So that could be the body of water that's being referenced here. But that also could be Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. And so it gets kind of hard to distinguish because we don't know for sure linguistically what would be what. Again, there's some geographical locations referenced in the Old Testament. There's some cities, like there's Pi Haroth is one that's mentioned in several other different fortresses and locations. But we don't have any definitive historic evidence to say we've absolutely found one of these locations to the other. Now, there are some good arguments to say that they might have been more in the north, but we just don't know. And so there's no way to absolutely 100% prove or disprove this without more evidence. Mm-hmm. Exodus 13 goes out of its way to tell us that the Israelites didn't follow the shortest route to go to Israel. So they didn't take the shortest route out of Egypt to modern day Israel. It's referred to, I think, as the way of the Philistines. And it's understood to have been a trade route, following kind of the Mediterranean Sea from Egypt and then U-shaping up to Israel. What's your question?
Just why?
Why what?
Why they didn't take the shortest route?
Because God told them not to. Like it says that they started to, and then God told them to go away from it. And then the text goes out of its way at the end of Exodus 13 to say that they go away, from that route, and they go wander in the wilderness, and God leads them in the direction of Yam Suf, of the Sea of Reeds. So that kind of seems to indicate the south potentially, but it's hard to tell because then we get all sorts of locations, referenced in the north, but we just don't know where these are. So let's see here. And God kind of does this intentionally. He does this to kind of bait Pharaoh. And the intent of it is to create like this presentation of confusion that Pharaoh thinks that the Israelites are trapped in the wilderness, basically. So it goes out of its way to say wilderness. So if you look at a map on Google Earth, once again, you can see where the Delta Nile is approximately and where a wilderness would be. It's very clearly not so much in the north. It's more towards Suez, or maybe they're on the Sinai Peninsula. So for those of you that are able to pull up your phones and take a look, I highly encourage you to follow along on like Google Earth or something as we reference these locations. So yeah, trying to see if I have anything else major I want to hit on about this. I think what makes the most sense to me, because, we can't be sure about that linguistic issue of the Septuagint Greek translation of Exodus. I think what makes most sense to me is it is indeed the Gulf of Suez, because the intent there is to create confusion like the Israelites are wandering around in the wilderness. And it makes a specific point to say that they go wander around in the wilderness. If they were still on the trade route that would be followed, following the edge of the Mediterranean Sea, they would still be en route to go to where the Philistine, follow the trade route of the Philistines and go straight to Israel. So it's very clearly annotating that they went somewhere south, in my mind anyway, regardless of what arguments you want to say that these cities like Pi Haroth and all of that are referenced are in the north. So, and I mean, the only major bodies of water that you have with that context given is the Great Bitter Lake that I referenced, and then the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. So I think that those still, by the linguistics that I have, because I can't verify the Dead Sea Scrolls translation of Exodus 14, I think that that's still the strongest argument that we have. But we can't know for sure. So I just wanted to kind of address that, talk about it a little bit, and I guess I'll give you a chance to play devil's advocate if you have any other thoughts.
I actually don't.
Okay. There is a lot of reference to Yam Suf as well before and after the actual account of the crossing. For example, when it talks about the locusts getting blown into the sea in Exodus 10:19 as part of one of the plagues, when God lifts the plague of locusts, it specifically says it blows them into Yam Suf. So it references Red Sea pretty consistently throughout all of Exodus, and it is specifically Hayam, again, in Exodus 14. So I think that's kind of worth hitting on. I mean, there's some good articles out there that'll talk about, the different locations where they speculate, and I think that there's some validity to, making very educated guesses. Yeah. Go ahead and say something smart for me, babe.
Hi. You can't put me on the spot like that.
I did the same thing to Trace. I do the same thing to pretty much anyone that helps me co-host the show. I gotta put people on the spot.
So yeah, I just started my new class in group counseling, so
yeah,
that makes me sound smart at least.
There you go.
I swear I'm a lot smarter than what I sound on here.
You're plenty smart, babe. You're a lot smarter than you give yourself credit for. But yeah, I think that's about all I've got on this topic, actually. I don't think that there's too much else to dive deep into.
Like without the translations and stuff. Like it's kind of hard to go any deeper with this, so. Yeah,
so I mean, just to kind of give you the rundown, since this is kind of something that's floating around on social media a bit and everything. To me, it just kind of personally, my personal opinion is it just sounds like a cop-out to be like, oh, the Bible claims these wild things about like God parting this massive sea, but in reality, it was just this little like waist-deep marshy area probably, if it even happened at all.
Yeah.
And it just kind of sounds like a cop-out to be like, oh, this didn't actually happen, to just kind of discredit with the sweep of a hand, which I don't really like. I think that I take a lot of texts, especially, okay, let me reword this. I take texts at face value unless I have reason to believe that they are poetic or symbolic. So like things like the Critias and Timaeus dialogues from Plato, which are the where we get our story of Atlantis from. I take those pretty literally because they present themselves as literal, historical discussion and fact. They give years on it that I think relatively makes sense. I take the Bible at pretty face value because it's demonstrated to be a reliable historical text. I'm not going to take mythology accounts like Greek mythology as very literal, but I think that there's a lot of truth buried in them. And that's like a large part of the intent of this podcast and doing comparative mythology. So try to sift through the truth and the myth. And some of that too, comes from the Atlantis dialogue actually, where they talk about, I think in Critias, and they talk about how there's like this one Greek myth, and I'm sure I've referenced this before, but there's this Greek myth, and the Egyptian priests are talking to this Greek guy about it, and they're like, yeah, you have this myth, but this is actually a real event. You guys have just convoluted it in myth and put all this allegory on it, and here's like kind of the truth of it. And so that's where kind of Atlantis shows that it's not an allegory, if you will, because it's actually shining light on other allegories. But yeah, so my mindset is to more take all of this stuff at face value, where if it's like, that would be a way to disprove my stance here, is if we were able to definitively show that the Greek word for sea is translated from the Septuagint back into like the Hebrew, and that's our understanding of the word that's used here for Hayam, then, and we are not able to, but see, that's the thing too, is like to be able to disprove that as well, to prove that's not just a different choice for a different location, you actually have to be able to find the Dead Sea Scroll of end of Exodus 13 and Exodus 14. So you also need that text.
And be able to translate it.
Well, yeah, which we can do.
Right.
But you would need that text to actually prove your argument as well. And so that would kind of be the scientific approach of the falsification. To either prove or disprove my side, absolutely, you have to have that fragment of text from the Dead Sea Scrolls or something comparable to the Dead Sea Scrolls to show, hey, this is originally Hayam or it's originally Yam Suf. And then that from there defines what is the truth. So if we don't have that, we can't absolutely say, oh, it's one way or the other. But that's kind of my personal thoughts, is I'm more inclined to take it on face value. And I'm more inclined to think that the translator, how do I word this? I'm more inclined to think that the translations of Yam Suf are chosen for like a reason, and Hayam are also chosen for a reason. In this instance, I don't think all translations can be absolutely perfect, but I think that this is I think this is intentional. I don't see any reason to question the certainty of this. So that's kind of my stance on that. There's nothing else too major that I think is worth hitting here. So I think we will move on to the next portion of the show. And since we took a ad break late, I think we'll take another ad break now. And then you want to tell us what we're going to be talking about next, because it's your catchphrase.
You lost me. Is it hell?
Close.
Oh.
Yes, it's very close to hell.
Don't go to hell.
Yeah. So don't go to hell. We'll be right back. We hope you haven't descended down to Sheol, or hell, depending on how you want to translate or define it. So this came to my attention as well, is that the Jewish people in their tradition have a very different understanding of what happens after you die than is taught in a lot of Christian circles. And for me, this was something I was pretty familiar with, but I kind of realized that a lot of people weren't familiar with this. So I wanted to kind of break it down real quick and tack it onto this show, since this one kind of, I predicted it would end up being a little bit shorter of a first segment. So we're going to talk about the Jewish hell, or more known as Sheol. So Sheol wasn't exactly seen as a hell, because it's referenced in Genesis 37:35 as being a place where people go that are seen as generally good when they die. And it's also seen as a place where people that are bad go. And that's seen as number 1633. And I think that's when God splits open the earth to swallow a whole bunch of people, and because they're rebelling against him. And it says they go down to Sheol.
So do they believe that Sheol is like just a holding place for everybody, or because you said good and bad?
It's just kind of a place where you go when you die. We'll get to the holding place part. There wasn't really anything necessarily in most Jewish teachings that showed it would be something like that. Something else would happen to you after that. But there was, and I'll address that in a little bit.
It's like their own little club.
So, like, for example, for those of you that are more familiar with Christian circles, the Sadducees were a religious sect around the time of Jesus, and they didn't believe in a resurrection. The Pharisees did. So that there was differing beliefs in Jewish circles as to what exactly would actually happen, when you died, and if Sheol was a permanent place of resting or not. Sheol is also defined as a place of inactivity. So Psalm 6:5 talks about how in death and in Sheol there is no remembrance of you, referring to God, and who's going to give you thanks in Sheol. So it's referenced as being a place where there's not really much that happens. It's kind of everyone's asleep. Talks about, let's see, let me skim through this here, see if there's anything to add. Yeah, not really. I mean, Isaiah 14:9-11 kind of reinforces the idea of, the realm of the dead, again, Sheol, and that there's not really a lot going on there, I think. Yeah, it's like, so like verse 10 talks about, you also have become weak as we are, you have become like us. So, a place of inactivity and not a place of strength. So, there is one verse that talks about, because this is really all that's kind of taught throughout the whole Bible, except for Daniel 12:2. And if you leave this one out, there's not a lot of great understanding about the afterlife in reference to Jewish culture. But this verse is important from Daniel 12:2. It talks about, this is from the American Standard Version, and many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall wake, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And I'm pretty sure the phrase dust of the earth is referring to Sheol there, or at least in principle, if not in literal linguistics. I'll take a look at that in a minute. But it's talking about how there's going to be everlasting life and everlasting contempt or judgment, if you will. Like another translation here that's referenced on the American Standard Version is abhorrence. So it's very clear when you're looking at Daniel 12:2 that there is something else that's going to happen after. And so if you exclude this from your examination, it might just seem like, oh, we just go to sleep when we die and that's it, kind of a thing. But there is more that's taught here. What do you think?
I mean, I think you're on it. So.
Yeah, so let me break this down here because I looked it up on Bible Hub, Interlinear Hebrew. So it talks about who sleep in the dust. Yeah, and yeah, so those who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake. And I mean, this is kind of a euphemism, if you will, a metaphor in a sense. It's very clearly, if you look at the context of what's being talked about here, it's not talking about literal sleep, because if I sleep on the ground, I don't have an opportunity to go up to everlasting life or everlasting abhorrence of life. Mm-hmm. You know, it's very clearly talking about the eternal sleep. And you see this kind of this metaphor is even used today in our linguistics. It's used by Jesus when he's talking about Lazarus in the Gospels.
Sleep with the fishes.
Yeah, it's just kind of a gentle way of saying death. And so that's what's happening here. And so Daniel 12:2 doesn't specifically reference Sheol, but that's what's being talked about. So with this kind of connotation, Sheol is kind of interpreted, in my understanding, to be more of like a holding place and, waiting for final judgment, which we then see taught in, the New Testament. Mm-hmm. Again, this will highly depend on your worldview and your approach. There are many different schools of thought, like the Sadducees had Daniel 12, and they still chose to believe that there wouldn't be a resurrection. And so they probably interpreted this verse differently versus the Pharisees would have interpreted it this way. But I do think it's interesting to take this idea of kind of like a holding place or, like a realm of the dead, because that's kind of what's referenced. Other mythologies have nods to this, such as like the Greek with, going down to Hades. And you see this in Gilgamesh as well, which we're going to discuss at some point here in the near future, where Gilgamesh talks to Enkidu and he dies about how to handle himself when he goes down to the realm of the dead. And that whole process is kind of discussed. The Egyptians have, beliefs about like the realm of the dead and then judgment afterwards. So you have a lot of different theories about all of this stuff, about what happens when you die from different worldviews and different belief systems, but it all kind of synergizes and intertwines together in some capacity or another, I think, when you look at the context of everything. But yeah, the modern idea of hell that you see taught in churches is from Jesus' teachings. Mm-hmm. That's really where that comes from. It's the New Testament. It's not. It's nothing in the Old Testament. Questions, babe?
I have no questions.
No, nothing to add.
No.
Okay. I want to touch on a couple more things, but I think we're going to take one more ad break first, and then we'll have some final thoughts, and then closeouts. So stay with us. Don't go down to Sheol. We'll be right back. And we're back. Ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, conspiracy theorists, this segment is for you. So one last thing I wanted to talk about, because there's a lot of stuff about reports about the UAPs and alien technology floating around. There's hearings in Congress going on about that. I think there's been like 4 sworn statements from government officials or something. I could be getting some of this wrong. I haven't looked into it all yet. But I think there's like 4 sworn statements from government officials or something saying that there's aliens out there and we're in possession of like their advanced technology, which is interesting. I'm not going to get too much into the political side of all of that. But I do want to talk about something interesting that I kind of saw floating around on social media. A lot of Christians are pointing out that there's this idea of underwater bases that's being discussed and that this is actually prophesied in the Bible. So You see this idea of underwater bases of aliens reinforced too by the Tic Tac sighting from Commander Fravor, where okay, so you don't know what that is. That's fine. I'll give a summary
All
here.
I heard
I'm sure.
was Tic Tac. I'm like, what?
So this Navy commander was doing a flight mission, and him and his co-pilot, and they actually got this on video. You can see the infrared documentation and video of it. They saw this Tic Tac thing, and it was a UFO, but it was able to fly at like hypersonic speeds without a boom, and they were kind of watching it, and it was interacting with something in the water, and they could see the water ripples, and the water ripples went away, and the UFO just took off and was like gone and like 10 kilometers away in like 2 seconds. And their other co-flight that was with them that was doing Overwatch picks it up on their radar or something, and then it was gone from there. So,
but then how much do you believe that though?
It's a documented sighting from a commander of the U.S. Navy that made a statement about it, and they have footage of it. Infrared footage from the actual flight that was not released by him, that was released by the U.S. government. Okay. And I'm pretty sure his co-pilot has corroborated his story. I'm not 100% on that, though. But there is very clear documented footage, and it is someone that, a commander, I think, is like, equivalent to like a major or lieutenant colonel or something in the U.S. Army, to equate it to those that are more familiar with the Army or Air Force ranks than the Navy or Marines. So it's a very high up commanding officer making a statement about this. But what I think is interesting is I think there's a verse, I didn't look up the specific verse, but it references that angels fell to the depths of the earth when they fell. What's the depths of the earth? Oceans. Oceans go deeper than land does. And then in Revelation, you also have a prophecy talking about beasts coming out from the sea, like a beast comes out from the sea as part of like the revelation process of like the end times.
How dope would that be if the Loch Ness monster just like came out? That'd be pretty dope.
It'd be interesting, but
it'd be scary, but
it's
pretty cool.
It's like a 7-headed dragon, I think.
Oh, so I think that'd be pretty cool too.
I think it's what we talked about last episode, something similar to that.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. So, which I think is interesting because then, it's opening up a whole can of worms to alien bases being underneath the oceans, and that this stuff is going to come out at some point, which is wild. And I'm actually working through a book right now. I'm going to leave this anonymous for now because I'm actually trying to get the author on the show, and I do have a date lined up, but I'm not going to name drop until we've actually done the episode because I just don't like to build false hope up for the audience too much.
Just in case.
But there is an author that's talked about alien abductions before, and some of like the idea of it being underwater bases like does seem to tentatively line up with all of that. So I think that's really interesting, but I figured you might have some more thoughts to comment on that. No, you don't have anything?
This is the first I'm hearing about it, so
okay.
I don't know. I'm still caught up on the whole Tic Tac, like flying, like
there's a lot of different UFO shapes.
Yeah, I just think it's funny that it's called Tic Tac. But
yeah, and then you start looking at all sorts of weird disappearances and everything that happen with people too, and then you got to question how much of that is like alien abductions and stuff. If this is really going on, are aliens abducting people like in the wilderness?
All of the disappearances that we were reading had a lot of similarities between them. Almost like it's the same entity or being.
Same MO.
Yeah, same MO, but the same person or thing, entity, whatever you want to call it, is doing that. But
yeah. And the book we're referencing is The Missing 411 East Coast. I will put the link for that in the show notes. You can get it from the Dave Paulides' website, which is, I think, like Can-Am US or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's a website dedicated to the missing, people and projects to try to find them. But it's
pretty interesting, actually.
It's a good read. I highly recommend it. We're still working through all the cases, but there is a lot of similarities there, and you can kind of start to piece together an MO that seems pretty similar. And, I wonder too, how much all of this connects to like UFO abductions and everything, and how synonymous these two are. So I'm interested to talk to this guest I have lined up and get their take on it and see how that kind of stuff contrasts with things, like that same MO that we're talking about.
It might be connected to that, but also most of the 411 or disappearances or anything line up with cave systems. So
You got to spoil that for me. I was saving that bomb to drop for a future show.
Well, maybe you should tell me.
Whoops. Well,
I apologize.
Yeah, that one is an interesting one. Is because I guess we'll talk about that now real quick, where someone took the cave systems in the United States, at least the known cave systems, and lined them up to the missing 411 map that Dave Paulides built from the East and West, and showed that there are almost identical correlations in hotspots versus larger mounts of cave systems.
Yeah.
So
I apologize for releasing that information.
It's fine. It's all right. It's been floating around on social media for some time, so I'm sure most of our listeners have probably seen that. But it is an interesting one, and it's definitely a big encouragement to go read his books about it.
Right.
Because I think that'll kind of, if you go into it with that mindset, I think that'll help you kind of piece together, the puzzle, maybe just a couple more.
And it's just interesting to hear like all of the weird like nuances too to each case. Like it's stuff doesn't add up. And it's just really weird and very interesting to kind of piece together your own theories and thoughts on it. But
I'm going to tangent off of this. I saw an interesting post today, actually, on Instagram, and it was looking at, I think it was like Queen Elizabeth or Queen Mary's from England's fingers.
Oh, how long they were?
Yeah, how long? No, so you saw that too. Okay, good.
And like her gloves were like twice the finger length of our fingers.
So I kind of had a realization moment, but it's like, you see all of this divine right to rule passed down, and you see this all the way from like ancient Egypt, where there's this divinity, if you will, that goes into ruling other people, from Egypt and all these other cultures, all the way, through medieval times kind of had this mentality. But like, what if like a lot of royalty over the years was actually like hybrided with some of these like aliens or something, and that's why you got weird disfigurations, and maybe that's why they were so interested in like inbreeding of royalty and not mixing with the common folk, because they didn't want to ruin that DNA that they had received generations past from like these alien. And I know I'm going down the rabbit hole in this one.
No, you reminded me. There's like someone, I maybe from medieval times or maybe Victorian. I have no idea what time frame or who it is, but I heard like about this one person, like royalty or whatever, and he was so inbred that like he had so many disfigurations and like a weird number of fingers and toes, and it was crazy to read, but that kind of supports what you just said about inbreeding.
And that's what you hear about in the Old Testament when it's talking about the giants of the Philistines, is that one of Goliath's brothers has 6 fingers and 6 toes. So I don't know, it's just an interesting rabbit hole to go down. I'm not making any absolute claims, of course, but like, you got to wonder the what if about, history. If all this stuff about aliens is true, even if you choose not to believe that they're angels or whatever, how long have they been here? How long have they been doing experimentations and, inbreeding stuff and everything? Like how do we quantify this, And I don't know, when you look at like really weird, and there can be weird genetic traits in of themselves. So I'm not saying every weird genetic trait is, this person has alien DNA. But when you have something
someone has long fingers, alien.
Right, but like you look at the extremely long fingers that are like 2 or 3 times the length of like a normal human's, and then you have like the lengthy body types of like grays and all of that are often portrayed, like gray aliens. Oh. Like they're really lanky body types, and that's something you see in common with a lot of different aliens. You have to start to ask the question to be like, okay, A plus B can equal C in this instance. That could be the case. It doesn't mean it's true, but yeah. So that was an interesting kind of theorization. I just kind of wanted to go down that rabbit hole for a minute, and it turned into like 20 minutes, theory. But I love it.
Yeah. Introduce the theory.
I mean, we've been doing this whole long conversation on UFOs. I need to try to get Phil on again to talk to us about all the conspiracy theories. He'd be all over this, I'm sure. So yeah, I'm
sure he would enjoy that.
I need to hit Phil up again and see if he'll come back on and talk with us some more. Because I feel like that, and I need to read this UAP report that's been released too. Because I think there's a whole report that's been released on this. I'm gonna try to get to that this weekend. But yeah, next episode will be Logical Fallacies. Introduction, Logical Fallacies 101. And man, many of you, not our listeners, but many of you on the internet in general desperately need a handbook to Logical Fallacies 101. People will use logical fallacies, and I'll be like, oh, that's this fallacy. You need to do a better argument. And they'll be like, oh, nice move, man. Just calling whenever someone doesn't agree with you a logical fallacy. And I'm like, no, it's a logical fallacy because of X, Y, Z. And I explain that, but nice deflection there. That's, I think that'd be the red herring logical fallacy. Be like, oh, yeah, look at this other thing over here. I don't know. I got to brush up a little bit before we dive in, because usually I'll kind of refresh my memory. But yeah, that being said, you have anything else interesting to share with us? Any other theories about the UFO stuff or anything that we were talking about, babe?
What specifically about the UFOs?
I don't know. Do you have any thought, any tangents to add? Let your ADHD run wild.
I don't think that's a very good idea. But I will say there's been a lot of hoaxes out there too.
Oh yeah.
With, not even just aliens, but Bigfoot, Loch Ness, everything pretty much. So yeah.
It gets hard.
So that's why I was kind of questioning the whole Tic Tac thing, because I was like,
very credible witness with a high reputation on the line, military service, and documented IR footage of the Tic Tac, from the jet itself.
And that's just me, because if I see something like that, if I see a video like that, it's like, okay, well, with how much technology we have now and everything, it's pretty easy to come up with some sort of video to fake something and then just add a blur to it or whatever. But I mean, and I'm not saying that is fake.
I think it was released by the U.S. government itself, and it was before AI technology had advanced. Wow. But
I can get into some
theories
about that, so I'm not going to say anything. But
oh boy,
I'm not going to go there.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying though. You do have to be wary, because there are a lot of people that will do fakes.
Yeah.
But that's
for attention or whatever.
Yeah, that's the thing. You have to evaluate too. Is there's often not a lot to gain from doing fakes. There's usually a lot of bad publicity. Some people get famous and rich. A lot of people.
It's not just that, but it's also to make other people believe what they believe, and that's something with psychology too. Yeah,
and then there's a lot of I'm not going to address this question at all, because I'm not getting political on this show. But there's also a lot of questions about is the government doing and releasing certain information as a psyop, if you will, to mislead the population, and that's a whole thing. But I'm going to address that that's a theory. I'm not going to get into that because I feel like it's a little too political.
It's a little too iffy for us.
We're more interested in just looking at the facts and the evidence,
yes.
Not so much the credibility or lack thereof in terms of political agendas.
Right.
So, I mean, bear that in mind that is a possibility and a theory amongst some individuals. So,
yeah.
Take with that as you will. That being said, I mean, unless you have any other major trains of thought here, dear, I think we are about ready to close out.
Oh, I figured out who that person was that I was talking about that was in royalty that was so deformed, but it was the Charles II of Spain.
Huh.
Yeah, that's who it was.
Okay, yeah. And there was just a lot of intermarriage of royalty. Now, whether that was just for alliance purposes, because that certainly was a reason, or whether that was more about keeping the lines pure in terms of this divine right to rule kind of thing.
I think it was a lot to do with keeping their bloodline pure. I mean, there's even royalty that was marrying their nieces, cousins. It's pretty crazy. But
yeah,
I think it's more about keeping the bloodline clean or pure, that sort of thing.
Yeah. No.
Or just wanting to keep the name and the dynasty or whatever, alive. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah. So let's see here. That being said, we appreciate you tuning in on this episode. You can find us at well, first off, you can email us at m.quad.musings@gmail.com. Please send us your thoughts, confessions, concessions, contentions, snide remarks. You send me your logical fallacies. I'm sorry. I'll leave you anonymous, but I am going to ridicule you on the show.
Or psychology questions and facts. I would love to hear those too.
Yeah, we definitely want to interact with our listeners, and there's usually not a lot of opportunity for that because there's not a lot of people that send stuff in, but when you do, we love to be able to interact with you and to, get to know a little bit about your perspectives and your belief systems and, what conclusions you've come to. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at m.quad.musings. You can Find us on Facebook at Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix. Going off of memory for all of this stuff, but I feel like I did a lot better this episode than the last one. I actually got enough.
We did, yeah. You did. You led the whole thing, but you had a lot more material. Got
enough rest to actually, have a good train of thought. And I actually prepped this episode last week, so it was still somewhat fresh in my mind. But yeah.
What's the next one? What's the next topic we're
Logical
covering?
fallacies.
Oh, yeah. You already said that.
Yeah.
Jeez. My ADHD is coming in.
Yeah.
So logical fallacies and then... Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I did look up a red herring would be a good way to represent that fallacy I talked about. That might not be the perfect definition, but it definitely would be very akin to it.
Right.
To take an idea that is completely irrelevant to the conversation and be like, oh, you're just saying logical fallacies, to anyone you disagree with. And it's like, well, no, it's because you're actually using logical fallacies. Mm-hmm. A red herring is basically just an argument you prop up to be like, oh, look at this thing over here, but it's not really relevant to the argument at all. It's distracting from the main point that the person used a logical fallacy and they're trying to deflect from it. It's like a deflection via argument. So, I guess we'll talk about logical fallacies for a second, since I kind of got derailed on my outro there.
Sorry.
That's fine. It's fine. I'm used to flying off the hip. So yeah, logical fallacies are, I think they're technically called informal fallacies. They're not like, a very high form class, but they are something you need to be familiar with if you're going to engage in any kind of logical discourse or debate in any way, shape, or form.
It's really just any method that you can use.
It's a method of faulty logic.
Yeah, kind of still prove your point, but not really.
Yeah, it's to make yourself seem good on the surface, but in reality, you're actually saying nothing and using something like circular reasoning. I think is an informal logical fallacy, like using something as an argument that depends upon itself as the argument. So, like the Bible is true because the Bible claims it's true, and it's like like that kind of thing. That's circular reasoning.
Yeah.
So
it's like parent because I said so.
Yeah, and it's important to be aware of these fallacies so you don't use them, and you can spot them when other people use them, so you don't fall for a bad argument. Because
I have a good example of a fallacy, but I'll save it.
Yeah,
for
we'll
the next
save
episode.
it for the next episode, which we're actually going to probably record tomorrow, so that we can stay on track for Wednesday of next week.
I promise I'll be more prepared.
No, it's fine. I didn't really ask you to be prepared for this. I just said show up and we'll talk.
Show up and you'll completely make me shoot off the hip, and I'm not used to that. So
yeah, it's fun watching you and Trace and other people struggle under pressure. So
yeah, you find a lot of enjoyment out of that.
Yeah. So last one I'll push here is buymeacoffee.com/m.quad.musings. If you got any value out of the show and you want to express your gratitude for that value in forms of a monetary donation, that would definitely be appreciated. It helps a lot with overhead, keeping our lights on. Not the biggest fan of asking people for money. That's why I haven't done it really before on the show until now. But I do put a lot of time in trying to prep these episodes, a lot of research time. I'll spend a lot of my spare time kind of skimming through, mythology books and studying other books that are relevant, and investing in audio equipment, investing in, getting a little bit more popular on social media so we can build a bigger following. Helps us recoup a little bit of those costs. And then, if we do ever eventually break even, we can actually do more fun things that, more relevant things to, more research, things to boost the show. So,
and I was going to say that I'm going to use my resources too for the episodes that I'll mostly be leading, but resources from school specifically to tie in psychology studies and everything. But yeah, just putting that out there too.
Yeah. So it definitely helps us, keep producing episodes. So,
yeah.
Well, anyway, that being said, whether you've been listening on the earth, above the earth, or below the earth, we thank you for tuning in this fine evening. And we hope you have a good rest of your night.